Thank you for joining Telehouse's global webinar, 2026 Priorities for Global Infrastructure Trends, which are shaping the Boardroom agenda. I'm Nick Layzell, Customer Excellence Director from Telehouse, and I'm the moderator for the panel discussion today. Board and senior leaders are making longer-term infrastructure decisions amid power constraints, AI uncertainty, and sustainability pressure. The purpose of this session will be to try and cut through ambition versus delivery reality as we head into 2026. Joining me today are two experts from consulting companies, Catriona Shearer, Global Head of Data Center Consulting at JLL, and Keith Breed, Associate Director of Europe Data Center Solutions at CBRE. Hello both.
Morning.
Hello.
Looking back at 2025, where did infrastructure strategies hit their limits, and what friction did that force organizations to change? Maybe, Catriona, the first question to you there.
Great, thanks. I'm going to kick off with the most obvious one possible, power. So what we saw last year and the year before was a reshaping of the data center world order, where power came to the forefront of more or less all strategic decision making. It became more important in terms of a go, no-go decision and talent, the availability of chips, the supply chain. It became power first in all things. Interestingly, that occurrence made connectivity as a requirement a little more, it made it feel a little more solvable, which wasn't something that we would have characterized previously. What that meant was in terms of driving strategy, you're really looking at power and timing, with connectivity sitting underneath that in terms of your decision-making factors. The constraints around power extend as far as or from transmission through substations and distribution, all the way through your construction decisions and into regulatory requirements. So it's end to end in terms of what's required from a power strategy point of view and required first. That change shows up in terms of certain uncertainty, as I like to phrase it. Essentially, we're saying that the data centers are being sold before they're being built, and we can be certain of that demand, but they're not being fitted out until the very last moment because we're still uncertain as to exactly how that's going to play out due to the sheer amount of change.
Does that give data centers flexibility then around this late kind of design or the late fit out? Or
an interesting question.
Does that
I
create
think
a problem?
It demands flexibility. I don't think it necessarily gives it because it's not a gift. It's more you're required to hold off as long as possible to make sure you have the ability to make that last minute decision. And whether that's the space is being used for AI or not AI. If it's AI but it's air cooled, there's less decision making and less flexibility that's needed. But actually, if you're looking at the origin of a space as an air cooled ordinary workload data center, but the tenant that you're after wants a high density compute environment, they're fundamentally different things. And the ability to maintain that agility and the possibility of change is what makes your data center more attractive, available, makes what you have on the table more attractive to the end client if they're not sure.
So that flexibility, keeping that flexibility there to adjust or adapt as we go forwards is key there.
Absolutely.
Great. And Keith, your views on then some of the infrastructure strategies and the limits and some of the constraints that we faced.
I think it's already been mentioned. I think the big constraint that we all face in the industry across Europe is power and the availability of power. And the fact is the demand for power and the demand for compute is increasing quite exponentially in Europe anyway. And what has happened is that the grid system we have in Europe is quite old and aging and cannot necessarily keep up with the demand which is coming in. So it tends to be increased on a kind of piecemeal basis, on a kind of incremental basis. So the actual two demand and supply is very, very different from each other. And what's happened in Europe over the last year is that take-up has actually exceeded the supply. Supply was about, we estimated roughly about 800 megawatts across Europe for co-location space, but it's probably outpaced by the amount of capacity that is actually required in most markets. And so we're finding that a lot of the demand is going into new markets where there is less constraints than there has been before. And this seems to be the case for AI, which arrived for the first time in Europe, and that's now gone into places which we haven't seen a huge amount of growth before, around the Nordics and into Southern Europe, into Spain and Portugal, those kind of areas, which are kind of almost like kind of frontier areas where the AI workload can be accommodated quite quickly. In other parts of Europe, where there are more power availability in terms of generating power, there's more availability, say, in the Nordics, where you have a high amount of hydropower, renewable power, and relatively small population. So you tend to find that there is more available power surplus, which can be transferred into an AI type large language model. I think you'll find that in a lot of countries, there's a kind of almost like a north-south divide. The population center demands a lot of energy and a lot of electricity. And because of that, it's difficult for the data center to be based there if it's a really high energy consuming data center. So that's why you're getting the data centers move a little bit away from the kind of established metro areas into adjacent markets nearby, like into the north of London or into the east of London, that kind of area. So that seems to be more and more of a trend now, not just in the UK, but in France and in Germany, and also into other countries as well, into the Netherlands, where more facilities being built into the north of the country rather than around the Amsterdam area.
So the demands on the grid, or the demands from the grid, the power requirements, and then the trajectory of AI coming in last year seem to be the lines on those graphs seem to be kind of diverging slightly, I guess. But Catriona, as we move through into this year and into 2026, where do we see demand pulling hardest, and does that change, or should that change site selection and delivery strategy?
Yeah, it's really interesting that site selection has changed quite significantly in terms of the lens through which those decisions are made. So site selection is now seen on a more practical level than perhaps it used to be. It wasn't, it's not as linear as it was anymore, because the power discussion isn't linear. It's on a different timescale entirely. The scale is on a different scale entirely. And what that does is it changes the lens through which sites are being selected and the prioritization order, or the attractiveness order in which they're laid out. When you look beyond site selection and you're looking to what you may build on that site, or what's already built on that site, those different build formats are maybe better or not for different workloads. So you've got the old, the new, legacy, non-legacy, prefab, modular, edge data centers. There's now a really wide selection of what's a really balanced amount of real estate. So you're not looking at edge data centers as being rare anymore. Legacy's not rare, brand new isn't rare. There's really an established order to what exists in terms of data center real estate and infrastructure. Those formats, whilst they're not interchangeable, they can be used in different ways, as we were talking about before. If you have the agility to make late decisions on your power distribution, your design, or your internal fit out, you can use those different formats in different ways. And if you look at site selection through the lens of what you need at the end and what needs to be built, those decisions being made are quite different now.
And I guess that means there's certainly couldn't be as far away from a one size fits all as it could possibly be. And is there a case then for a kind of a multi-site sort of strategy where I guess power hungry workloads may suit that kind of shed style, more horizontal layout, whereas you may want to combine that with a connectivity rich environment at a different site? Or is there still a desire to go for a kind of a everything at one location?
And again, I think it comes down to who's the tenant, what power is available, and what do they want. But we are definitely seeing a trend towards a campus nature, multi-use, non-specialist in one place necessarily, and the ability to use what you've got to the best of the infrastructure's ability.
Thanks. And Keith, your views on that, as we head into 2026, and I guess beyond. Some of these decisions are not particularly short term either, I guess. But your views on the site selection and delivery strategy there.
I think there are two types going on. I think there's one which is going to be the metro, which is still going to be very much the key for a lot of areas, because the user wants to be close to the actual data which is being generated. So this is going to happen more and more as inference comes in with AI. So that's the metro side. But when you go out to the large campus environment, then it's going to be very different. It's going to be very much a wider floor space. It's going to be much more build for hyperscaler type applications and for very large, say, neo clouds which are coming to Europe now. And they're starting to dictate a lot of what the build plans are for new data centers. So that's the kind of challenge. I think you'll see the divide in the market. You'll get the co-location with some AI, and then you'll get the kind of the hyperscaler neo cloud requirement, which really is gambling on very high densities for large language models and other types of application in the future.
So it's probably a big question for the middle of the webinar, I guess. But is it then the customer, the user, that's dictating the strategy of the data center build, along with obviously the challenges that we're aware of in terms of power, for example? Or is it the data center provider that's kind of dictating the use case for their buildings? Maybe not a simple question to answer, but what are your thoughts, Catriona? Any thoughts on that?
Again, I think it's one of those things that varies, and I know that's a non-answer, but I think depending on the moment at which you're able to sell your space can often depend on who makes the biggest decision. So if you have a greenfield build and you secure a hyperscale tenant nice and early, I think that you're going in one direction at that point. Whereas if you're looking to acquire a bit more space in Slough, for example, it depends entirely what you're buying, who you're buying it from, what state it's in, what shape it's in, and then what you want to do with it. And it depends on your business plan and your business strategy, perhaps as a colo. And all of those things combined mean you've just got 1,000 go, no go decision gates along the way, and you can go left or right at any of them. Again, long way of saying it really varies. And I think what we have now that we didn't have 5 to 10 years ago is, as an industry, we have a skill set that enables us to be that agile. I think if 10 years ago you suggested off the bat being this agile, the construction industry wasn't ready for it. The data center operators weren't ready for it. But actually now we come into work every day fully expecting to have to be agile, quick and flexible.
And do you feel, maybe Keith, then following on from Catriona's comments, do you feel then that the engagement between the customer and the data center operator is a much more consultative process? It's your sweet spot, you guys. So I guess you'll say yes to that. But
we'd like to think so. We'd like to think so. I think there's one kind of element which has come in, which is the neo cloud operator, and they're very different from a lot of the other operators or users we've seen in the past, because they want to have things done instantly, because they're concerned about getting speed to market very quickly. And they want to get the GPUs in and used right away before the actual depreciation starts and before the price comes down further. So their big rationale is we take the space wherever it is, and we'll take it now, and we want it in 6 weeks, not 6 months. We want it in 6 weeks. It's that kind of scenario where they're pushing for. So that's quite new for us in Europe, and that's come along over the last year or so with the neo clouds. Now coming from the US, now coming into Europe, and now actually starting to say we want to do things very, very quickly. We don't want a master of service agreement. We just want to go ahead right now. So that's quite new. But for the rest of it, I think Catriona made a really good point right at the start when she was talking about the way to build data centers, and that is you have to do it in sections. So you have to do the shell first, and then you basically look at the mechanical load and what is required for the density, and you try and postpone that as far along the line as possible, because sometimes there are users saying, oh, we think we need liquid cooling, we're not quite sure. And so it's kind of on or off, whether they'll go or not. So you need to actually prepare the site and be ready, but not necessarily go for the full extent of fitting it out for them until they're actually certain about what their demand is.
I think sitting behind some of that as well is where we've got in the last few years, we've seen a wave of new money, different investors coming in. And whilst the lender pool has actually statistically got smaller, that lender pool is a very different shape to 5-10 years ago. So that new money that comes in wants what it wants, and that can sometimes also sway the decision making of the operator or the developer. Because if the investor is saying you've got 2 years to produce X, Y, and Z, they're much more likely to go for either a quick retrofit, which can be fitted out quickly within supply chain timeframes and up and live, or go for something prefab.
And clearly, AI is influencing a lot of this. We're aware of the speculation around the trajectory of AI and the uncertainty underneath it. But what do we feel is real today, and then maybe coming down the line as we head further through this year and beyond? Catriona.
So for me, the interesting point is confidence. We're now relatively confident as an industry in how to train LLM AI and what that takes in terms of infrastructure, power, time, investment. There's a level of comfort and confidence around that. It's a very different position to where we find ourselves in from an inference perspective. We're making educated assumptions, yes, but actually, until that global use case or use cases are invented and adopted, and we're really seeing multiple cases of inference in the market at global scale, we are still living a little on assumptions. Those use cases for the global inference boom are not completely certain. I think it's fair to say there's a level of assumption that those use cases will come, and I think that's a fairly safe assumption. The bit that freaks me out as a risk manager is nobody can nail down exactly what those are. And having confidence based on assumption is always something that's going to freak out a consultant. So that uncertainty shaping, Keith, your favourite word, optionality. So uncertainty shaping the number of options you need to be able to provide, produce, set aside, fundamentally comes back to we don't know what we don't know. But what we do know is solid, and we're making future-based assumptions based on decent knowledge.
Yes, I think it's all about timing. We can't quite tell in Europe when the actual takeoff point will be. And yeah. I think there are some industries where you could argue they're more innovative and they're actually putting more resource into AI right at the start, and that could be areas in the financial services industry or pharmaceuticals, life sciences, those kind of areas. But this is a relatively small picture of the total, I think. So we're still waiting to see where the rest of the market comes from.
Exactly that.
Keith, is that the key question then for this year? Do you think that AI and that ubiquitous kind of situation, or is it are we starting now?
I think so. I think that's going to be the idea. How much further does it go? I mean, I think in the short term last year, it kind of took off based on there was some kind of realignment in some of the hyperscaler demand. There was it started off very healthily, when it kind of stopped for a while because there was more capex questions being raised internally. Then it was put on hold, and it kind of took off again towards the end of the year. And I think a lot of the gap in the market was taken up by the neo clouds, who were looking at AI and GPU as a service, and they were offering this to their own end users, and they were offering this to some of the hyperscalers as well, who just wanted capacity really, really quickly. And that was to the benefit of the industry as a whole. I think it will be interesting to see what happens in the coming years with the neo clouds, because again, some of them may well be looking to raise more money and to become more of a kind of conventional asset player, if you like, and develop their own sites as well as actually rent capacity. And others will perhaps be merged with other companies, for a little bit by the wayside, which is what always happens when you have a kind of a large new market arriving. And the other aspect is again inference and whether that really takes off or not. And I think it'll probably take a little bit of time before it to be adopted. I think it'll be another couple of years or so before we can actually say for sure what is happening there. And the enterprises are a little bit more cautious than, say, the hyperscalers. The hyperscalers got enormous budgets and they want to spend an enormous amount of money really, really quickly.
Thank you. And then obviously, we've talked about AI there and how, inference, maybe is becoming a at scale. But from a customer's perspective, from the end user's perspective, what do we think AI ready means? And in practical terms, Catriona, what is that? Are data centers AI ready, I guess, is the question. To give the customers the comfort that they can deploy their their AI in today's data centers.
Yeah, and again, I think looking back at who the customers are is really important. So if you're looking at a neocloud customer versus a bank, they want very, very different things from their, in inverted commas, AI-ready infrastructure. A neocloud, to Keith's earlier point, wants something that is business model ready, that can generate cash flow from the off, whereas an enterprise client like a bank might want an AI environment within which maybe they could test their new chatbot or something similar. They're both AI and they both have fundamentally different requirements. And that's another one of the layers of complexity that the providers face. So you, as a provider, you absolutely need for your AI-ready digital infrastructure, you have to have your power and your power strategy. So it has to be secured, distributed, and you have to have your cooling pathway at the very least agreed. So you know what you're selling, you know what your building is capable of delivering. What that means is you're creating a level of building design for the power and cooling requirements from which you're going to be able to attract or not a particular type of tenant. That agility is very important. We've already covered how important that agility is to say, I've got this shell and core, I've got this power strategy, and I've got this cooling ability. And at the last minute, I'm going to fit out the interior to suit your requirements. But there's definitely a balance in there in the supply chain, or with the supply chain. If, for example, you've not, in your cooling pathway, you've decided to hang back and wait to see if the cooling is going to come off the bus bar or via PDU, but then you suddenly need to order and get delivered and fit all of your PDUs because that's the direction your tenant wants to go in, you're then subject to the supply chain pressures that everyone's experiencing globally. Can you afford to wait? Does that mean you may have to potentially stockpile some infrastructure elements, some power infrastructure elements? It's all a really complicated question, and it will always go back to who are you trying to attract and what do they need? At the two ends of the spectrum being, a bank's chatbot to a neocloud provider.
Thanks. And Keith, your views there on from a customer, from a tenant's perspective, what's it going to be for them?
I think the question I would have with some customers, and they pose to us, is do we really want to be providing AI and outsourcing, if you like, to a hyperscaler, or do we want to be? Would it be better for us to actually construct things ourselves and have our own kind of AI environment which we control ourselves? Because they're worried about things like intellectual property and how their actual use of AI might be deployed by a third party, by a hyperscaler, for example, in the future. So there is this kind of feel about security and how is the best way to maximize their security internally, whether they actually use a co-location site or whether they actually go back to the idea of having their own premise, which they can actually control themselves. So that can be another discussion we're starting to see in some customers. They're starting to say, well, we would prefer to have our own AI chatbot, which we develop ourselves, and we want to have this within our own premises rather than to actually give to somebody else. So we have to discuss that with them and see what they're looking for, really, and try and analyze some of their security concerns. But it is something which is happening. And the other thing which is happening a little bit is regulation. That's coming in more and more in Europe now. And is talking about things like the PUE and also water usage as well. So that's going to be another thing which is going to be we have to monitor, we have to report on it, and the end user may have to report on it and monitor it as well. It's not quite clear who owns that reporting mechanism, whether it's the co-location provider or whether it's their actual end user who will have to also do the reporting. So that's another challenge, really.
Great, thanks. Yes, certainly from Telehouse's perspective, you know, we have the flow down of lots of those regulatory requirements or sustainability requirements, and I think you know, we have to work in conjunction with customers as an operator to be able to satisfy those regulations and those reporting requirements. It's you know, we're all working together, I think, to try and deliver. So just to really pivot slightly to sustainability, it's been you know, it's been a huge factor and you know, I wouldn't say a trend, but a very important thing. Very strong focus over the last 5 years or so. But what do we feel is changing most around the table stakes that are sustainability now? What other pressures do we feel are coming from that direction, Catriona?
Yeah, I don't think there's any new pressures from our perspective. We work with clients on really similar things. So the pressure's gone up due to the increased burden of requirement, particularly from the EU. Our global clients like to use the EU's requirements as their global standard because it means that they know they're aligned at the higher end of best practice. They continue to try and make trade-offs because the return on investment in purely commercial terms from sustainability is only really seen where you're reducing your consumption. If it's anything outside of a consumption reduction, there's no tangible ROI. And coming back to the earlier point around investors, sometimes that's a difficult story to spin to say, no, this is just the right thing to do and it costs money. I think those arguments are being had up and down the globe. And the last thing for us is the ambition to be green is often higher. The appetite is often higher than the reality of the existing infrastructure. I think the vast majority of everybody would be buying renewable power if there was enough renewable power to buy. I don't think many companies want to be buying fossil fuel based power. It really is a case of what's available, can I get to it, is it at a price that my business can work with? If not, you're looking back at that ROI argument of, is it the right thing to do? Can we afford to do the right thing on every single decision we make where sustainability is concerned? If not, there has to be a balance in commercial terms.
Thanks. And Keith, from your perspective, you know, what do you feel are the big issues in sustainability as we move forwards?
I think it really depends on the planning regime, and the planning regimes keep on changing quite a bit. So that is actually a bit of an issue when it comes down to it for a lot of data center providers and a lot of markets as well. Because if we look at Germany and their implementation of the PUE rates as well over the last few years, that means that the actual efficiency of a data center has got to be improved radically over the next few years. And it's on a year-by-year level, and it's quite difficult to do. So there are things that there's a process of education we have to do, I think, with the authorities and with the planning people and the actual government and local government as well, which is going to take quite a bit of time. But it's part of what we have to do, I think.
So a little bit of a trade-off, you think, between you know, the massive kind of expansion of AI and how to maintain and operate you know, as efficiently and responsibly as possible.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes these decisions are made by people who don't quite understand what how a data center operates and what is best practice and how that should be looked at first before you say, no, we're not going to allow water usage above this level, this amount of usage. So that is perhaps the problem. That's where the education needs to come in, I think.
Thanks. I guess then, you know, Catriona, I think you know, we've obviously discussed the challenges of power and the continued the continued trajectory of AI and the demands of workloads and that kind of thing. But if you were briefing a customer aboard that were looking to deploy AI or other workloads in data centers, what are two or three things that maybe that you know they can't ignore, the real priorities that they should be thinking about?
Look, I choose my words carefully with this one because, you know, we've already touched on how broad these topics are. So for me, it would be power certainty. So regardless of what your strategy is or who your tenant is, you have to have a level of certainty over what you're doing where power is concerned. Design agility, so that includes the flex, but it also includes business model agility. So if your business model isn't flexible, you have a lot less power to be flexible as an organization, and that includes in your design. And the last thing is connectivity. It can't be an afterthought. Although it doesn't come to the top of those discussions every single time like it used to, you absolutely cannot have connectivity as an afterthought. So it'd be those three things for me.
And Keith, from your perspective, anything else to add there? Any other things that should be absolutely at the top of the list of considerations for customers?
Not really. I would just say skills and training, these kind of things could be important as well. Where you go somewhere where there is a remote area, you need to have a lot of development there and education and training to actually take place, I guess. The other thing I would say perhaps is that maybe you need to look at sustainability as well, and where you can get renewable power and where that is available, which is probably going to be the real direction of travel for most of the industry going forward, I think.
Fantastic. So I think if there's one message from today, around 2026 and beyond, power is a very big issue. Obviously, AI awareness, sustainability, the constraints that we face, and boards need a realistic view of what actually can be delivered, keeping their options open from a data center operator's perspective, keeping their options open. Thanks so much, Catriona and Keith, for joining me today.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
And if you'd like to continue the conversation with Telehouse, CBRE and JLL, please scan the QR code and we'll get in touch with you. Thanks again for joining our webinar today.